Now moving on, we're going to get into some picks for the quarterfinals in a moment, but let's look ahead to another tournament that's coming back. I know it's a favourite tournament of many people's. It is, of course, the Premier League and the 8-player lineup. We're not quite sure what it's going to be, but let's make some predictions. Who is going to make your 8-player lineup for the Premier League in 2024 as things stand?
Well, obviously, Mark Walsh will be the first. No. I've created 4 tiers of players, 5 that I think are in, then 2 separate tiers of players that are currently in, but they're not comparable in how they're in. I've ranked them between what I think is currently more in and less in, and then a tier of 4 players that could still get in, but they all either have work to do or need results to go their way. And maybe you could throw Joe Cullen onto that last list, but I've not put him on it. So let's start with tier 1, the 5 players who for sure are in. And I won't need to talk more about them than just mentioning them. Assuming it stays the top 4 guaranteed, well, there's still the possibility that someone else will move into the top 4. But right now, Michael Van Gerwen, Michael Smith, Luke Humphries are obviously in the top 4 no matter what happens the rest of the tournament. In fact, they're in the top 3 no matter what happens. Nathan Aspinall, currently by the price of a round trip plane ticket from the UK to Europe, is currently 4th, just ahead of Gerwyn Price. He could still be caught by a few people, but even if he is caught, Nathan Aspinall's in. He's the world match play champion. Gerwyn Price also, even though he didn't win a major this year, even though he tailed off on the second half of the year, I think he's in, assuming he wants it. So those 5, I can't see any scenario where any of them are left out other than if they choose to be removed from consideration. Now I get into 2 other tiers of players, which is just 1 player in each. The European champion Peter Wright is the next tier. I think he's probably in, but I can see a scenario where players jump him if results go perfectly in a particular way. One involving the next person on my list, Rob Cross. But I think the only way Rob Cross gets in and Peter Wright doesn't would be if Rob Cross wins his quarterfinal and loses an epic semifinal to Luke Littler, and then Luke Littler wins a final against someone else, against probably Dave Chisnell. That's really the only scenario where I could see Peter Wright dropping out of this. Right now, he's ahead of Rob Cross because he's almost certainly in, but I think there's a scenario where he can drop out. Rob Cross is that next tier. I think he's most likely in this field, but it's not a guarantee. And if he goes out pretty comfortably to Chris Dobie, I could see 2 of the players from the last tier jumping him. I don't think he's safe yet. I think winning his quarterfinal probably gets him in unless he's absolutely destroyed in the semifinal. But Rob Cross currently in, but not guaranteed. And then there's 4 players that I have still with a chance. 3 of them because they're still in this field. Although, I mean, obviously you can throw in anyone who's still in this field has a chance. But I'm not saying Brendan Dolan or Scott Williams are likely enough to win the world title for me to include them in this conversation. Obviously, if they win the world championship, I think they probably do get in. But there's 3 that could do damage and could still win this world title, plus Danny Noppert that I have on the list. Dave Chisnell, Chris Dobie, Luke Littler, and Danny Noppert. Noppert, I'll talk very quickly. He can really only get in if Chizzy and Dobie both lose their next match and are non-competitive and really play their way out, and Luke Littler doesn't go on to win the world title, and neither does any others do. I don't think Danny Noppert has a strong chance after losing that first world championship match, but I can see a scenario where the others in this list play their way out and Noppert gets in. Chizzy, I think, is currently in the last spot, having won those 3 Euro Tour titles, having played at such a high level all year except on TV, but then bringing his best now at the World Championship. I think Chizzy's currently in the last spot, but he's not by any stretch guaranteed. Chris Dobie, I think, is the next person there. If he can beat Rob Cross, if he can make the world final, I think he's in. Even if he just plays better than Chizzy, maybe he'll jump him. And then Luke Littler, I think, just needs to win the world title to have a chance. But obviously, I think maybe he can. So right now, I'll say Chizzy's the last person in, but there's still a lot to play for. And even Peter Wright, as my 6th person in, is not guaranteed.
Whew, yeah, I don't know if it's just me, but I've not seen a lot of talk about the Premier League during the World Championship this year. I think usually there is a lot of discussion on social media about it. Maybe it's been the run of Luke Littler that's taken all the attention, but we are expecting the Premier League lineup to be announced pretty soon. The Masters for 2024 takes place after the first night of the Premier League season, so we already know the Masters is not going to be that unofficial Premier League buy-in like it has been for the last few years when Johnny Clayton, Joe Cullen, Chris Dobey have won the title to get in the Premier League. So it is really all down to these next few days, the last few days of the World Championship, for players to make a case for it. And you mentioned about the rankings, the top four. 3 of those 4 spots are locked in. We know that Michael Van Gerwen, Michael Smith, Luke Humphries, they are going to finish the World Championship in the top 4, so they're guaranteed in. And I think anyway they'd be in, wouldn't they, considering what they've done in the last year. Beyond that, you mentioned about Nathan Aspinall, currently 4th, but he could be overtaken if Rob Cross gets to the final, or I think it's Chizzy, Dobey, Dolan, one of those wins the World Championship. They'd move into that top 4. But like you say, Nathan Aspinall, World Match Play winner. It's hard to picture a Premier League lineup without the winner of that title being in there. So, yeah, I think Nathan Aspinall gets in there, even if he drops out the top 4. And he did have a disappointing World Championship. But that match play title, as soon as you win that, you're pretty much guaranteed to be in the field. So that leaves 4 spots up for grabs. And I do think these spots could change depending on how the results play out over the next few days. If we do see someone like Scott Williams, Brendan Dolan, Luke Littler, Dave Chisnall, Chris Dobey win the title, then they're obviously guaranteed to be in. But I think for Chris Dobey or Dave Chisnall, if one of those 2 gets to the final, I think that probably will be enough for them to get in. But until one of those things happen, I don't think they're currently in at the moment. So I'm going to go down my list. I'm going to go with Gerwyn Price at number 5 in the rankings, got to the final of the Premier League this year, topped the table. And although he's not won a big singles title this season, I think that Premier League campaign, the high spot he's got in the rankings, that's going to keep him in the field for 2024. Rob Cross, right now, I think he is in that 8-player lineup, got to the Grand Slam final, the Masters final at the start of the year, and he's had a few years out of the Premier League, but he's talking more positively about wanting to be involved in it again. You think back to the Masters at the start of the year, and Rob indicated he wasn't interested in the Premier League, but he's had 2 years out of it now. He seems to be ready to be back in the Premier League. So he's in that lineup for me. That leaves me with 2 spots, which I am struggling with now. I'd love to say Andrew Gilding, the UK Open champion, but I think he is unfortunately going to join that short list of major winners not to get in the Premier League the following year. I think he did need another big run on TV, another final, another title, but unfortunately for him, it didn't happen on this occasion. Peter Wright, I'm not confident with this pick, but the European Championship title, I think it puts him in that lineup right now. Is he one of the best 8 players in the world? You'd say he's not. He had an awful Premier League this year, and he's had a pretty disappointing season, even though he's won quite a few titles. But with the Premier League, we know it's about filling up these big arenas. Peter Wright, he's still a very popular player with the fans, and he does still command that star power. So Peter Wright is in that 8-player lineup for me. The last one, this is where I'm struggling. You were talking about a few players I was going to mention. I did think Chris Dobey might not be in it, but just looking at the list of players that could be in, I think I'm going to give him that final spot as things stand heading into the quarterfinals. He's not had a big run since winning the Masters, but what he has been, and you touched on it on the show recently, how consistent he's been as well, the performances that he's put in on a regular basis, and he has had quarterfinals in the match play, the Grand Prix, the European Championship, and now the World Championship, and he is still in that tournament as well. So if he can beat Rob Cross in that first quarterfinal tomorrow, that might just be enough to see him get that last spot. So yeah, that's my 8 for the Premier League, but I think I might be changing it after tomorrow's play or after the semis or after the final, because unlike previous years where it's been pretty clear cut who's going to be in, I think there is still 2 or 3 spots that are up for grabs.